Where did you get this? David Thompson was arrested last night. Where did you get this?
David Thompson was arrested in Topeka just 3 days ago, and the system flagged him as Marcus's match.
Marcus Williams felt the weight of 17 years pressing against his chest as he sat across from Detective Ray Harrison in the cramped interview room of Kansas State Penitentiary. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows under both men's eyes. But it was the manila folder in Harrison's hands that made Marcus's pulse quicken. After nearly 2 decades of proclaiming his innocence for an armed robbery, he swore he didn't commit. Something had finally changed. "I need you to look at this photograph very carefully," Harrison said, sliding a prison intake photo across the metal table. "Tell me what you see." Marcus leaned forward, and his breath caught in his throat. Staring back at him was his own face. Not similar, not reminiscent, identical. The same angular jaw, the same deep-set brown eyes, even the same small scar above the left eyebrow from a childhood accident with a bicycle. But the name printed below the photograph read David Thompson, and the booking number belonged to someone else entirely. "Where did you get this?" Marcus's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. Harrison's weathered face remained impassive, but his eyes betrayed years of experience with cases that defied explanation. Thompson was arrested 3 days ago for aggravated assault in Topeka. When they processed him, the facial recognition software flagged a match with an existing inmate. For 17 years, Marcus had insisted to anyone who would listen that the convenience store clerk had identified the wrong man. The robbery had occurred on October 15, 2007, at Shell Station on the outskirts of Kansas City. Marcus had been 200 miles away, working a double shift at a warehouse in Wichita, but the alibi had crumbled when his supervisor claimed no record of the overtime hours. The security footage from the store was grainy, the witness testimony shaky, but the identification had been confident enough to convince a jury. "The victim," Marcus said slowly, his fingers tracing the edge of Thompson's photograph. "Mrs. Chun." She was so sure. She looked me in the eye during the trial and swore it was me who pointed that gun at her. Harrison opened the folder wider, revealing police reports, witness statements, and crime scene photographs that Marcus had seen too many times to count. Thompson has priors. 3 armed robberies between 2005 and 2007, all in the greater Kansas City area. All matching the same pattern as your case. The rooms seemed to contract around them. Marcus had spent 17 years in a 6x8 cell, watching his mother age through monthly visits until she could no longer make the journey, watching his younger sister graduate college and get married through photographs smuggled in letters. He had missed his father's funeral, missed the birth of his nephew, missed every milestone of a life that had been stolen from him by a face that wasn't his. "The DNA evidence from your case," Marcus said. "They never found any, right? No fingerprints on the weapon, nothing definitive except the witness identification." "That's correct. The gun was never recovered. The only physical evidence was a partial footprint that matched your shoe size. But that wasn't exactly conclusive given that you were a common size 10. Marcus studied Thompson's face again, searching for some minute difference that would explain how this was possible. The resemblance went beyond the superficial. They shared the same facial structure, the same bone composition, even what appeared to be the same mannerisms in their booking photo. Both men had their heads tilted slightly to the right. Both wore the same expression of resigned defiance. "Has anyone run a DNA comparison?" Marcus asked. "That's being processed now." "But Marcus, I need you to understand something." Harrison leaned across the table, his voice dropping to the tone reserved for delivering devastating news. Thompson's arrest record shows he was booked for similar robberies during the exact same time period as your case. The dates overlap. If he was the real perpetrator, it means It means an innocent man has been in prison for 17 years while the guilty one remained free. Marcus finished the sentence that Harrison couldn't bring himself to complete. The implications settled over the room like dust after an explosion. 17 years of appeals, 17 years of legal battles, 17 years of insisting that he was innocent while the real perpetrator continued his criminal activities. Marcus felt a familiar rage building in his chest, but it was tempered now by something else, the overwhelming possibility that vindication might finally be within reach. "There's more," Harrison continued. "Thompson's cellmate came forward yesterday. Said Thompson had been bragging about jobs he pulled in Kansas City back in '07. Specifically mentioned a Shell station, an elderly Asian woman, and how he never got caught because they arrested some other guy who looked just like him." The blood drained from Marcus's face. During the original trial, the prosecution had painted him as a man desperate for money, someone who had turned to crime out of necessity. They had constructed a narrative around his financial struggles, his mother's medical bills, his history of minor infractions. But the truth was simpler and far more terrifying. He had been condemned by the accident of genetics, by the cruel lottery of resemblance that had made him look identical to a man he had never met. "Mrs. Chun," Marcus said again. She was so certain. When she testified, she said she would never forget my face, that she had stared at it for over 2 minutes while I demanded money from the register. She wasn't lying, was she? No, she wasn't lying. She was describing exactly what she saw. But what she saw was David Thompson's face, not yours. Marcus closed his eyes, trying to imagine the moment when Mrs. Chen had first seen him in the courtroom. The recognition in her eyes, the way she had pointed at him with trembling fingers, the absolute certainty in her voice when she said, "That's him. That's the man who robbed me." She hadn't been identifying Marcus Williams. She had been identifying the face that belonged to David Thompson, a face that Marcus happened to share through some impossible coincidence of bone structure and genetics. The statistical probability, Marcus said quietly, of two people looking this identical without being related. What are the odds? Harrison consulted his notes. I spoke with a genetics expert at the University of Kansas. She said the chances of finding someone with this level of facial similarity is approximately 1 in a trillion. But here's the thing that bothers me most. Thompson knew. His cellmate says Thompson specifically mentioned that someone else was doing time for his crime, someone who looked enough like him to fool witnesses. The revelation hit Marcus like cold water. Thompson hadn't just escaped justice. He had been aware that an innocent man was paying for his crimes. For 17 years, while Marcus rotted in prison, Thompson had been living with the knowledge that his freedom came at the cost of another man's life. How many more? Marcus asked. How many other crimes might have been attributed to me because of this face? That's what we're investigating now. Thompson's criminal history goes back further than we initially thought. There could be other cases, other victims who identified the wrong man based on appearance alone. Marcus opened his eyes and looked at Thompson's photograph again. The face that stared back at him was his own, but it belonged to someone who had made choices that Marcus never would have made. It was as if he was looking at an alternate version of himself, one who had chosen crime while Marcus had struggled to make an honest living. The irony, Marcus said, is that I used to wonder sometimes if there was someone out there who looked like me. You know, like the old saying that everyone has a double somewhere. I never imagined that my double would be the reason I spent the best years of my life in prison. Harrison began gathering the documents, but his movements were slower than necessary. But if he was reluctant to end the conversation, the district attorney is reviewing the case. With Thompson's confession to his cellmate and the physical similarities, there's a strong chance your conviction will be overturned. And Thompson, he'll be charged with the original robbery, plus the additional crimes we've connected to him. But Marcus, Harrison paused, meeting his eyes directly. I know this doesn't give you back the time you've lost. Nothing can do that. Marcus nodded, understanding the weight behind the detective's words. 17 years couldn't be returned, couldn't be lived over, couldn't be experienced again. His mother was gone, his relationships were destroyed, and his life had been fundamentally altered by a case of mistaken identity so profound that it challenged the very notion of individual uniqueness. "There's one thing I want to know," Marcus said as Harrison prepared to leave. "When you arrest Thompson, and you tell him that his doppelganger is finally being released, I want to know what he says. I want to know if he feels anything at all about the life he stole from me." Harrison stood, tucking the folder under his arm. "I'll make sure you know." "And Marcus? For what it's worth, I believe you. I've always believed you, even before we found Thompson. Some cases, you just know when something doesn't fit right." As the detective left the interview room, Marcus remained seated, staring at the space where Thompson's photograph had been. Somewhere in the same prison complex, separated by concrete and steel, was a man who shared his face, but not his conscience. Tomorrow, or next week, or next month, Marcus would walk free while Thompson took his place behind bars. But the face they both wore would remain the same, carrying the weight of crimes committed and innocence lost, a genetic coincidence that had derailed two lives in opposite directions. Marcus Williams had learned that identity was more than appearance, that justice was fragile, and that sometimes the stranger who looked like you could steal everything you were while wearing the face you were born